Hi everyone, today I am making a box for a recurve bow. This is the design that I came up with in Onshape. My plan is to make the box out of black walnut and use maple for the inlays. I am going to cut the pieces for the bow inlay out of maple, holly, padauk, pau amarello, and wenge. I am going to start by planing and jointing this walnut board that I am going to use for the top and bottom of the box. Now I need to resaw this board roughly in half to get the top and bottom pieces. The blade of the bandsaw wandered quite badly while I was cutting this piece, which causes some problems later on. I am going to glue these two pieces together to get a piece that is wide enough for the top of the box. For the bottom panel, I had to cut the pieces in the opposite direction because the blade wandering made this piece almost too thin. It turns out that the board also warped after I resawed it, which made clamping these pieces together somewhat interesting. At this point, I decided I needed more clamps, but for some reason I used the small ones rather than the ones that would have actually been helpful. For some unknown reason it actually worked that time, so I decided to take the only logical course of action and hit it with a hammer a few times. After that, I decided to add a bunch more clamps and then cross my fingers. And now I need to start cutting the pieces for the sides of the box. Using the router table, I am cutting an 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch slot into the side pieces for the top and bottom panels. And now I am routing all the way around the top panel to get the proper profile. Now that I have all the main pieces for the box cut, I need to lay them out and then start gluing the box together. In hindsight, I should have given all the pieces a little bit more tolerance. They all fit together well on the dry fit, but once I started trying to put glue in the joints, everything was a little too tight. And also, in an amazing flash of brilliance, I forgot to put any glue in any of the corners. I didn't realize I had forgotten the glue until the next morning. Then I kind of panicked and cut the box open to see if it was going to be strong enough. I ended up flexing the corners open a little bit and adding some crazy glue. Now that I have the lid separate from the box, I am going to put it on the CNC machine and route out the seam between the top panel and the sides, so that I can add a maple inlay. I'm going to run a test pass first, just above the wood to make sure everything lines up. Okay, it looks like everything lines up alright. Now I'm going to run this job again with the proper height set. Now I am going to switch from an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch bit and pocket out the main area for the inlay. First, I need to reset the Z height. I am going to vacuum up the wood chips and then check the tolerances now to make sure that everything turned out properly. Okay, so it looks like everything turned out properly, so now I can start working on getting the inlays ready. Any inside corners cut on the CNC machine come out round because of the round router bit, so I need to clean those up now. I cut the outer maple inlay pieces on the laser. I ended up having quite a few problems with this in getting the tolerances right. So for the inner ring of inlays, I ended up just cutting straight pieces on the laser and then cutting the 45s with the belt sander. Here I am cutting out the two main black walnut pieces for the lid inlay. Now I am gluing the maple inlays and the main black walnut piece into the lid. Now I'm going to weigh this down and wait for the glue to dry. While I'm waiting, I'm going to cut out the rest of the pieces for the inlay. Okay, now I have the rest of the inlay pieces cut and I need to glue them in. It took me quite a few tries to get these pieces cut with tolerances that I was happy with. I purposefully left these inlay pieces thicker than the pocket so that I had some extra room to sand down afterward. Now I need to sand the inlay flush with the top of the box on the drum sander. Next up, I am using this jig to cut the slots for the splines on the table saw. I am going to use maple for the splines so that they match the maple inlays in the lid. I prepared all the maple spline pieces so that they are a tight fit in the slots, and now I need to glue them in. I let the glue dry overnight, and now I'm going to trim off the excess wood with a flush cut saw. I am using this Festool vacuum clamp for the first time, and it is working really well to hold the box without marring the wood. Okay, that's the bottom finished. Now I need to move on to the lid. Next up, I need to sand all the splines flush with the box. My plan for the foam to go in the box was to take a whole bunch of pictures of the bow and load them into a program called Meshroom, which uses photogrammetry to generate a 3D model of objects. I would then take that model and use the CNC machine to cut a perfectly contoured pocket to hold the bow. There was no real logical reason why I needed to do this, but I just thought it would be cool. Unfortunately, on my first attempt, I ended up with something that looked like it had been on the bottom of the ocean for a few hundred years. And on attempts after that, my computer kept crashing after 4 hours. So I decided to give up for now and just go with the boring method of tracing a 2D profile of the bow. I finished laying out the design for the foam insert and started cutting pockets on the CNC machine. But I somehow managed to not get the job zeroed in the right spot, and it was almost running off the edge of the foam in a few places. And also the foam wasn't cutting nearly as well as I was expecting. I almost abandoned this job, but then I decided to let the job finish and see if I could clean it up with a Dremel afterward. Oh, and did I mention that it seems like Meshcam intentionally tried to come up with the most convoluted toolpath possible? It's actually kind of funny to watch this thing run. I'm sure some of that is my fault for making some of the pockets almost too thin for this router bit, but still it doesn't even attempt to take the shortest path between cutting points. Once the roughing pass finished, I changed out the 1/4 inch bit for an 1/8 inch bit and started the finishing pass. The finishing pass actually did a surprisingly good job of cleaning up the foam. But I'm sure all these pockets still ended up significantly smaller than they were designed to be, because the bit tends to just push the foam out of the way rather than cutting it. At this point, I decided to pause the job and see if the bow actually fit before I let it finish up. It's probably a good thing that the pockets ended up smaller than they were designed to be, because the bow fit perfectly in the pocket. Once the router job finished, I cleaned up the edges with a sanding block and then worked on the pockets with a Dremel. Okay, now that I am done cleaning up the foam, it's time to test fit it in the box. It actually fits better than I was expecting. It's probably lucky it ended up a little bit larger than I had spec'd it out at. I don't even need any tape or glue to hold it in the box. Now I am going to add the rest of the parts for the bow. Okay, so now the box is finished. I've got the foam in the base and an extra piece of foam lining the lid. So now I'm going to attach the hinges and clasps. I pre-drilled all the holes for the clasps and hinges to make sure that the wood didn't crack, which would have been a catastrophe at this point. At this point I thought I was done, but then I opened the box and realized that the hinges would probably rip out unless I added some straps to keep the lid from opening too far. At first I was looking for chains to hold the lid at the right position, but then I realized I had some of this faux leather from a previous project that looked really good with the box, so I sewed 2 strips out of that. I cut 2 of these extra clasp pieces to make parts to hold the ends of the straps securely. Okay, and once that's done, the only thing left is to show some pictures of the finished box. Okay, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and bye for now. This is majorly, yeah.
So let's get on the floor.
Well, I don't want to hit it with a hammer.
Okay, well.